Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Farr, president of the Religious Freedom Institute. Today, we're honored to host an event commemorating the life and martyrdom of Mr. Shahbaz Bhatti. Welcome to each of you. We're grateful you could join us. You're going to hear today from a spectrum of this great man's admirers, including members of his family, his friends, and some who never met him, but whom he has touched with his courage and his faithfulness to God. Whatever your religious beliefs, we hope you'll see Shahbaz Bhatti as we do, a witness to hope, a witness to love, and a witness to the sacred cause of religious freedom for which he gave his life. Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to today's event. My name is Jeremy Barker, and I serve as the director of the Religious Freedom Institute's Middle East Action Team. It's my privilege to serve as the facilitator for today's program. We hope through the commemorations and discussions that you'll hear today that you'll hear about Shahbaz Bhatti as a man of deep faith, who precisely because of that faith was a bold and courageous public servant and advocate for people of all religious beliefs. As a Christian, he was a defender of religious freedom for everyone. And as you'll hear in his own words later on, precisely because he believed in Jesus Christ. In the statements throughout the program and from dozens of others around the world, you'll hear of people from a variety of traditions who recognize the importance of religious freedom for everyone and are working to carry forward that effort, to carry on Shahbaz's legacy. To open today's program, it's my privilege to invite Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, Canada's former ambassador for religious freedom, a senior fellow with us here at the Religious Freedom Institute, and director of the Cardis Religious Freedom Institute in Canada, to open today's event in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Jeremy. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A reading from the prophecy of Isaiah. Then flew one of the seraphim to me, having in his hand a burning coal, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin forgiven. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. Lord God, as we mark this anniversary of the martyrdom of Shahbaz Bhatti, we thank you for the life and work of Shahbaz. Like the prophet Isaiah, he responded to your call to serve you by being a defender of the persecuted and a voice for the voiceless. May his witness continue to inspire us in our work, and may he be a faithful intercessor now for all of us. We ask this in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, one in the Holy Trinity, both now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Today's event is being co-hosted by the Religious Freedom Institute, together with the Institute of Global Engagement, as well as International Christian Voice. It's my privilege now to introduce the founder and chairman of International Christian Voice, Mr. Peter Bhatti, the brother of Shahbaz Bhatti. I would say that Peter's firm resolve and his warm spirit has done so much to carry this effort forward over this past decade. I'll invite Peter to say a few words. We'll have a greeting delivered by Ms. Ruby Sahota on behalf of the Prime Minister of Canada, and then we'll hear from the next generation of the Bhatti family. But Peter, please say a few words.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Dear friends, on behalf of International Christian Voice Canada, it is my great privilege and honor to welcome you all to the 10th anniversary commemoration event of my brother Shahbaz Bhatti. I want to express my sincere thanks to all of you. You have joined us from around the world for being with us today and participating in this significant and meaningful event. Your participation in this event is proof of your love and admiration of Shahbaz and your belief in his cause. to be voice of voiceless and to uplift those who are marginalized and oppressed. I would like to thank our partners in this event, the Religious Freedom Institute and Institute of Global Engagement, especially Mr. Jeremy Barker and Mr. Knox Thames. Thank you for your hard work in organizing this event and for your dedication by carrying the legacies of Shahbaz's mission forward. I would like to offer my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who sent a video or print message sharing your tribute to Shahbaz's life and his legacy. Please accept our sincere thanks to all of you. Dear friends, religious freedom and human rights were very important to my brother's life. He spent more than 30 years of his working to protect the rights of religious minorities of Pakistan and those around the world. He dedicated his entire life to fighting persecution, intolerance, discrimination, and inequality, and he worked to liberate oppressed, victimized, and downtrodden religious minorities of Pakistan. Defending the victims of religious intolerance and persecution and promote religious freedom in the country like Pakistan is not an easy task. My beloved brother Shahbaz Bhatti was willing to risk his own life in his fight for the rights of vulnerable minorities of Pakistan. He challenged the forces of violence and darkness who threaten him daily and refuse to be silent. Some of us must take small sacrifices in the fight of the justice and equality. My brother Shahbaz Bhatti made the ultimate sacrifice of his life. After the Shahbaz martyrdom, those of us in this family had two choices. Either we gave up on his mission and allow our enemy to claim victory, or to follow to his footsteps and continue his struggle. I am here to share that giving up and letting his enemy to win is not an option. It is the duty of all of us to carry on his mission and vision. We want to see a world where people of all faith have live with freedom, in peace and equality anywhere in the world. We committed ourselves to work to continue Shahbaz's mission to liberate the vulnerable minorities of Pakistan from victimization, persecution, intolerance, and inequality. Finally, I like to remind all of you value of the importance of human equality and religious freedom. Please do not take it granted. I thank you all again and humbly ask you to join us in our struggle to support suffering religious minorities in Pakistan and others around the world who continue to live in darkness and suffering. The vision, mission, and legacy of Martyr Shahbaz Bhatti will continue to live forever, and his sacrifice will not go in vain. I am confident that Martyr Shahbaz Bhatti is very happy today looking down us from heaven and seeing us working together to fulfill his vision of the world in which all people can live in freedom, harmony, and peace. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a vision that is being carried forward. It's my privilege now to welcome Ms. Ruby Sahota, a member of the Canadian Parliament from North Brampton, to offer a greeting on behalf of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Ms. Sahota, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, it's a pleasure, Jeremy, to join every year in this event, and it gives me great pleasure to bring greetings from the Prime Minister of Canada. And I'll read his message to you now. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the virtual Shahbaz Bhatti Memorial Gala, hosted by International Christian Voice Canada. Today we honor Shahbaz Bhatti, who lost his life standing up for religious minorities in Pakistan. In the face of immense persecution, he stood courageously for what he believed in. And as a result of his efforts, countless individuals have continued his fight against oppression. As we mark the 10th anniversary of Mr. Bhatti's death, let us reflect on his legacy and the unwavering stance he took against injustice. We will never forget his sacrifice and his enduring message of hope and religious freedom. The COVID-19 pandemic has made hosting and planning events like this especially difficult, and I would like to thank the dedicated organizers for making this event possible even this year. Please accept my best wishes for a memorable event. Signed, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us and offering your own words, which we'll be privileged to hear later on in the program. So it's as Peter mentioned, the mission of carrying forward Shahbaz's legacy has become something of a family legacy, and we'll hear now from his nephew, Mr. David Bhatti, who offered his words of reflection of his memories of his uncle, as well as the work he's doing now, inspired by his legacy.
Some of my favorite childhood memories are of our family trips to Pakistan. I still recall stepping off onto the tarmac at the Islamabad airport and being seized by the warm breeze and the hazy night sky. They were immediate reminders that I was entering one of the most unique and remarkable places on earth. And after eventually getting through to the gates, I'd always see my Uncle Shahbaz, who would be waiting with a big smile on his face and would welcome me with unrelenting love and joy. Nothing made him happier than when our whole family got together. He was second to none as everyone's favorite, and his charm and sense of humor could turn the worst days into the best. But what I hadn't realized then was that although he always radiated such happiness, he still carried the grief of the innocent lives lost to another suicide bombing at a place of worship. Or he was harboring the heartache of wrongfully incarcerated prisoners who were languishing cold and alone and without any hope. Or he was experiencing the weight of the agony felt by villagers whose entire homes were burnt to the ground simply because they were religious minorities. He empathized with the persecuted and oppressed deeply and shared in their pain daily. But what I saw with greater certainty through each visit was that despite every reason he had to give up hope and to abandon his country, he remained a true patriot. He loved his country because he believed in the vision and the values upon which it was founded, and held reverence for its history and for those who sacrificed everything to see it succeed. For him, challenges were opportunities to lead by example and to effect real, lasting change for this generation and for the next. He dreamed of seeing not just a Pakistan, but a world in which the dignity and worth of every human being was respected, valued, and celebrated. It was a dream born through faith, the kind of faith that sheds light into the darkness and conquers the fear of anything that stands in its way. And it was a dream of hope, the kind of hope that inspires and spreads like fire, knowing that the summit is worth the climb and that persistence breeds success. Through his years of leadership and action, my uncle diligently created a structure in Pakistan that has allowed religious minorities to enter into positions of influence and power, ensuring that they will always have a voice and a seat at the table. He also fostered a new degree of solidarity and interfaith harmony among all victims of religious-based persecution, ensuring that they will never feel alone again. And he enabled a new generation of children to know that their dream of a better life is within reach, that they can receive a real education and uplift their families and communities, and that they should shoot for the stars and nothing less. Religious freedom is the most basic and sacred freedom to which all human beings have a right. Wherever religious freedom is repressed, we see vigilante violence in the place of justice, chaos in the place of the rule of law, and tyranny and oppression in the place of democracy and liberty. Without it, we see a distortion of the truth, which inevitably leads to the destruction of the moral foundation without which no society can flourish. When we work to enhance religious liberties wherever they are threatened, we safeguard the inherent God-given rights of all people and move closer towards creating a more just and equitable world. This is something that my uncle Shahbaz knew well. It was an understanding rooted in his faith, and it was the driving force behind his life's mission. And most importantly, it is what enabled him to have the courage of his convictions until his very last breath. Our family continues to miss his presence, and we still think about him every day. But we are proud of the powerful example that he has left for the rest of us to follow. Bearing his loss is made easier when we see how much he continues to inspire people all around the world. People who have kept him in their hearts, people who keep his dream alive, and who pledge to carry on his mission. Today, there are many who continually face threats to their most fundamental freedoms. Those of us who hold a stake in preserving peace, justice, and equality cannot afford to sit idly by while the most vulnerable among us continue to suffer. We must never become passive to or desensitized by our challenges, no matter how big they may be. My uncle believed that to despair is to accept defeat. For him, silence was never an option. The legacy he leaves behind is a call to action, to be uncompromising in our principles, to name injustices wherever we see them, and to be fearless in our pursuit of the truth. For those who share in this legacy, this is both our source of encouragement and our biggest challenge to continue moving forward on the straight and narrow path towards a brighter future for all.
David's words are a call to action for each of us, as he recalled from his uncle that to despair is to accept defeat, and silence is never an option. For many who have worked on human rights and religious freedom in Pakistan, perhaps the case that has defined the past decade is that of Asia Bibi. Her cause was one that Shahbaz took up in earnest to combat the charges of blasphemy brought against her in 2009 and a death sentence that was handed down against her in November of 2010. One of his allies in that cause, the governor of Punjab province, Salman Taseer, was gunned down in January 2011. And it would only be 2 months later before Shahbaz himself was assassinated, in large part because of his advocacy for Asia. Well, it would take another 7 years. In 2018, the Pakistan Supreme Court did acquit Asia of the charges, and she is now free, living in Canada. Today, we're honored to hear a statement from her in remembrance of Shahbaz and his advocacy on her behalf.
हेलो एवरीवन, मेरा नाम आसिया है। मसीह यीशु में आप सबकी सलामती हो। मेरी तरफ से आप सबको सलाम और दुआएं। और आज मैं आपसे मुखातब हूँ शहबाज भट्टी के बरसी के वसीला से, कि जैसा कि वो अपनी कौम के लिए जद्दोजहद करते रहे और उन्होंने की और मुझ जैसी गरीब बेबस और लाचार का साथ दिया, जैसा कि उन्होंने अपनी कौम से वादा किया और उन्होंने पूरा किया, और वो करते रहते और उन्होंने अपनी जान दे दी बगैर अपने ओहदे के अपने ओहदे की परवाह किए बगैर, और उन्होंने मेरा साथ दिया और उन्होंने अपनी जान दे दी, उनको मार दिया गया। मेरा दुख दर्द उनके साथ, उनकी फैमिली के साथ, उनके बहन भाइयों के साथ, क्योंकि मुझे जब भी उनकी याद आती है तो मैं खून के आंसू रोती हूँ। और मुझे वो दिन कभी नहीं भूलता कि जब मैं कैद में थी तो मैंने सुना कि शहबाज भट्टी को कत्ल कर दिया गया है। मेरी सब उम्मीदें ख़त्म हो गई, लेकिन फिर भी खुदावन ने मुझे हौसला दिया और फिर खुदावन ने मुझे आज़ादी दी कहना में अपने बच्चों के साथ, अपने खामन के साथ, और बहुत से लोग ऐसे कि जिन्होंने मेरे लिए काम किया और मेरा साथ दिया। उनमें बहुत बड़ी शख्सियत यूरोपीय यूनियन की डॉक्टर जॉन फिगल साहब, वाजपेयी साहब की इस शहादत को मैं कभी नहीं भूल सकती। आज भी मैं उनके लिए रोती हूँ और मेरा दिल रोता है, मेरी आंखें रोती हैं। खुदावन को अपने बाग़-ए-अदन में जगह अता फरमाए, क्योंकि मैं समझती हूँ वो मरे नहीं हैं, वो ज़िंदा हैं। मेरी प्राइम मिनिस्टर इमरान खान से अपील है कि खुदाया ऐसी चीज़ों पर गौर व फिक्र करें, क्योंकि आपको ऐसे क्रिश्चियन कम्युनिटी के लोगों की बहुत सख्त ज़रूरत है जो हमारी बच्चियों के साथ जबरे मज़हब तब्दीली, ज़नाकारी और उनको कत्ल कर दिया जाता है। खुदाया इस पे आप गौर करें और हमारा साथ दें। क्या हमारे हीरोज़ जैसे कि शहबाज भट्टी साहब जो कि अक़लियत के वज़ीर थे, क्या ऐसे वज़ीरों का खून हम ऐसे ही बहाते रहेंगे? हमें हमारी क्रिश्चियन अवाम कम्युनिटी को इस चीज़ के लिए मैं मुखातब करती हूँ कि आप मेरे साथ खड़े हों और मेरा साथ दें। मैं जब इस वाक़या को याद करती हूँ तो मैं रोती हूँ। मैं कभी भी उनको भुला नहीं सकती मरते दम तक। तो मैं अपनी कौम से दरख्वास्त करती हूँ, अपील करती हूँ कि आप आएँ, हम मिलकर इस जुर्म और ज़्यादती जुल्म के लिए जद्दोजहद करें, ताकि हमारे आने वाली नस्लें इस जुर्म और जुर्म की भेड़ ना चढ़ें। आप सबका बहुत शुक्रिया। खुदावंद आपके साथ हो। आमीन।
Hearing from Marcia reminds us that victims of religious persecution are not just nameless, faceless statistics, but are real people, and there are real lives impacted by this. The stakes for religious freedom remain high in Pakistan and around the world. As a part of today's event, we received dozens of tribute statements from individuals who are working in the cause of religious freedom. Many of them knew Shahbaz and were encouraged and inspired in their efforts by his life. Those tributes are all available to be seen on the event page, and it's our privilege now to share a selection of those tributes with you. First, you'll hear from Cardinal Joseph Coots, the former Archbishop of Karachi, and Mr. Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, Canada, and a friend of the Bhatti family. Then Most Reverend Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Ahmed Shahid, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Ms. Ruby Sahota, a member of the House of Commons of Canada, Ms. Gail Manchin, the Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and finally, Mr. Frank Wolf, a former member of the U.S. House of Representatives. And then this montage will end with a clip of Shahbaz speaking in his own words in one of the last interviews that he gave before his assassination. He was asked about the threats on his life and the reason why he was being threatened. Please watch.
It was 10 years ago, on the 2nd of March 2011, that all of us in Pakistan, whether Christians or people of other religions, we received a severe shock when we got the news that Mr. Shahbaz Bhatti, a federal minister, a member of parliament, a great person loved by so many, had been gunned down by terrorists in his own car within a high security area of the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad. I remember that moment with great sadness even now, because Shahbaz, for me, was not only a minister, a member of parliament, a politician, he was also a friend. I knew Shahbaz since his earlier days as a student. He was not really interested in politics. He was not involved in politics in the earlier part of his life, although he was a social activist and a great one concerned about human rights. It was only later that friends convinced him to join one of the leading political parties precisely so that he could continue this work at a higher level. And he did it. He joined this party, and they found him so good, so capable, that they made him a minister for the religious minorities in Pakistan. And I know that he was well respected among not only the religious minorities, the non-Muslims, but also by many Muslim parliamentarians, politicians, and his own friends. Shahbaz was a man of vision. It was very clear, I remember already from his early age, he felt very much whenever he saw there was discrimination taking place against the religious minorities. And he wanted to do something about it. He was not a violent man. He didn't talk about attacking others. He just wanted to highlight that point and wanted to see everybody in Pakistan living according to the vision of the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who had assured us in the early days, already in 1947, that we would be equal citizens in a free country, in a democratic country. We do have democracy, but we still have a lot of discrimination. We have a lot of inequality, and that is what worried Shahbaz. As an educated person, he was a graduate, and he was continuing his studies in various ways. So he was concerned about that. He just wanted all the religious minorities of Pakistan to be recognized as equal and fair citizens of Pakistan. And this is what he was working for. He was gunned down by terrorists because he had also spoken up against the infamous, what we call the blasphemy law, which is being misused even now. But the memory of Shahbaz is so strong. He was one of the finest Christian leaders we had. We miss him. And we were so confident that something more would have been achieved. Yet we live in a society, it's not always the government, it's also society, it's the culture in which a lot of extremism has been breeding and is still there. But the memory of Shahbaz gives us hope to carry on, because there are problems everywhere and we cannot keep silent. So I would just say thank you, Shahbaz. 10 years later, we remember you. We pray for you. And we pray that what you wanted to change, we may be able to change and have a fair and just country to live in.
Thank you to all of my friends at International Christian Voice for commemorating this 10th anniversary commemoration of the martyrdom of our brother, Shahid Shahbaz Bhatti. Thank you especially to Peter Bhatti and the whole Bhatti family for continuing to keep the memory of Shahbaz alive and continuing to convey the message of his martyrdom to a world that needs to understand it. You know and recall that I was so honored to welcome Shahbaz to Canada on his last visit outside of Pakistan. and to accompany him back to the Ottawa airport after having met former Prime Minister Harper, to have pled with him at that time to stay here in Canada because he knew he was returning to Islamabad to face mortal danger. Sadly, his prediction of an assassination attempt came true only 2 weeks later. Let me quote to you an email that I received from Shahbaz just a few hours before his life was so brutally taken by the terrorists a decade ago. He wrote to me, quotes, "I personally believe that it is Jesus Christ who has once again bestowed unto me his responsibility and position with a special purpose and mission to serve the suffering humanity. And I am determined to carry on defending the principles of religious freedom, human equality, and the rights of minorities," unquote. Those are some of the last words that he wrote, likely on a computer from his mother's house just hours before being attacked. As you know, Shahbaz said, quotes, "I will consider myself most fortunate if Jesus Christ will accept the sacrifice of my blood to raise the voice for the justice and rights of the persecuted and victimized Christians and other minorities in Pakistan." There can be no doubt that there are very few examples in our own time more clearly of the spirit of martyrdom than Shahbaz, who knew that he was returning to almost certain death. That is why I've been working with a network of legislators around the world to promote the cause for Shahbaz's beatification, so that he might be a symbol and an example to people around the world, but particularly to legislators, to those in the vocation of politics, to lead with dignity, with servant leadership, and even with sacrificial love. That is the moral of Shahbaz's remarkable life. So thank you again to all of those of you who keep his memory alive. And we hope one day to be able to pray prayers of intercession to Shahid Shahbaz Bhatti, just as we do to his patron saint, St. Thomas More. God bless you all in your virtual gathering this year, and I look forward to seeing you again all in person when we can do so safely.
The challenge of maintaining religious freedom is one that is difficult beyond any possible description. Sometimes the cost of maintaining it is huge. And in the case of Shahbaz Bhatti, as we all remember, tragically, it cost him his life. On this occasion of remembering him, I do so with profound gratitude to someone who was full of courage, of life, and of vision, whose moral imagination was extraordinary. His death posed a challenge to Christians around the world, to Muslims around the world, and to the Pakistani government. My friends in Pakistan tell me of the efforts being made by the Pakistani government to improve the situation of Christians and other religious groups in Pakistan. Thank you for the work you're doing. May God strengthen you and deepen your work, for it is indeed central to the future of your wonderful country. Martyrdom in Christian tradition means a witness or a testimony. Martyrs are not only those who die, but those who live, and by their love and their goodness, their generosity of spirit to all other human beings, testify to the love of God in Jesus Christ. Shahbaz Bhatti was one of those martyrs, what in the Christian tradition is known as white martyrs, as well as, at the end, one of what are known as red martyrs, those who've paid with their blood. We give thanks for him. We pray for those who will still miss him, his family, his friends, those who loved him. We pray that such sacrifices are no longer necessary and that we learn to live in harmony with one another. May God bless you.
Good morning and good afternoon. Today, we honor the memory of Shahbaz Bhatti, the first Federal Minister for Minorities Affairs of Pakistan, a renowned leader and fearless defender of the rights of religious and belief minorities in Pakistan. 10 years ago today, Shahbaz Bhatti was tragically and brutally murdered on his way to work. A staunch advocate for interfaith harmony, Shahbaz Bhatti strongly opposed his country's infamous anti-blasphemy laws and called for legal reform. While serving on the Pakistan cabinet, Shahbaz Bhatti spoke up for the fundamental rights of all by calling for the release of Bibi, who was arrested on false charges of blasphemy and sentenced to death over a disagreement with her neighbor. Despite threats to his personal safety, Shahbaz Bhatti solemnly vowed to continue defending the rights of marginalized religious and belief minorities. The Taliban claimed responsibility for Shahbaz Bhatti's shocking murder, alleging that he was a blasphemer. To this day, Pakistan has stringent anti-blasphemy laws which carry the death penalty for insulting religion. These laws are invoked frequently, often on trumped-up allegations, with reports that Pakistan is one of the worst countries in the world for enforcing anti-blasphemy laws. Both members of the Muslim majority and religious or belief minorities in Pakistan have been charged under anti-blasphemy laws. Such laws are often used worldwide to stifle the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief, as well as healthy dialogue and debate, and violates a myriad range of rights. Their existence also encourages vigilante attacks with impunity and cripples the authority of the government. Globally, there is growing consensus that anti-blasphemy laws are contrary to the promotion of human rights. The UN Human Rights Committee has emphasized that prohibitions of displays of lack of respect for religion or other belief system are incompatible with international human rights law. Achieving equality and ending exclusion for religion or belief minorities, whether in Pakistan or beyond, requires that we embrace diversity through promoting and implementing international human rights standards. As we mark the 10-year anniversary of Shahbaz Bhatti's tragic death, it is important to recognize and remember that his legacy lives on. The lessons that imparts to us all that anti-blasphemy laws remain a significant and concerning risk for the enjoyment of the fundamental right to freedom of religion or belief. Today, in his memory, I renew my call to Pakistan and other states to repeal anti-blasphemy laws which render societies dysfunctional through their use and abuse. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruby Sahota, and since my election as Member of Parliament for the riding of Brenton North in 2015, I've had the great privilege and opportunity to join International Christian Voice, Peter Bhatti and his entire family year after year in remembering and honoring the legacy of Shahbaz Bhatti. This year marks 10 years since his assassination, and I know the loss his loved ones and people around the world feel will never truly go away. But what the Bhatti family has accomplished in honoring Shahbaz Bhatti's memory speaks to who he was and honors the work that he has done and the legacy he has left behind. I bring greetings on behalf of myself and Mr. Rob Oliphant, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs today. And I know I can, and all religious minorities around the world can count on Peter and International Christian Voice to be at the forefront of advocating for religious minority rights and offering protection to those that need it most. International Christian Voice, inspired by the work that Shahbaz Bhatti did to protect religious minorities, has changed dozens of lives. And based on those who are attending and speaking today, I know that they will go on to protect and save hundreds, if not more, in the future. The Government of Canada and the Prime Minister, Honorable Justin Trudeau, have always stood up for human rights, and you will always have a partner in us. Thank you for allowing me to be here once again and to address you.
Good morning. My name is Gail Manchin, and I serve as the chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. I am honored to be a part of this event today, commemorating the life and legacy of Shahbaz Bhatti. He was a man of great bravery and integrity, and his tragic loss 10 years ago continues to be felt by people of goodwill around the world. USCIRF had a very close relationship with Mr. Bhatti, first supporting him as a tireless religious freedom advocate, and then working with him as the only Christian cabinet member in his capacity as Federal Minister for Minority Affairs. In September 2009, USCIRF facilitated a visit to Washington, D.C. to introduce him to policymakers at the White House, the State Department, and Congress. During that visit, the Commission presented Mr. Bhatti with an award for his courageous work defending the rights of all Pakistanis, especially religious minorities. USCIRF was aware at the time of the danger he faced because of his public advocacy. In fact, despite receiving numerous death threats for years, Mr. Bhatti forged on and never wavered as a man of deep faith. USCIRF highlighted the need for better security for Mr. Bhatti. However, our concerns went unheeded. We also called for his killers to be held to account, but they were never prosecuted. Mr. Bhatti, along with Salman Taseer, the former governor of Punjab, were both murdered within 2 months of each other for speaking out against Pakistan's notorious blasphemy laws. They also championed the case of Bibi, a Christian mother of 5, who spent nearly a decade in prison after being sentenced to death for blasphemy. Miss Bibi is thankfully free today in Canada, in part because of their shared legacies. In the years since Mr. Bhatti's death, violent extremism has increased in Pakistan, and religious minorities remain a target, particularly Shia and Ahmad Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and Sikhs. And Pakistan's blasphemy laws are still being enforced vigorously, with dozens of innocents languishing on death row and others serving lengthy prison terms. Now, more than ever, the U.S. government must send the message that there will be consequences for these egregious abuses by imposing targeted sanctions on Pakistani government agencies and officials responsible. 10 years after his assassination, we continue to gain strength from Mr. Bhatti's legacy. He defended a vision of a diverse, multicultural, and multi-religious society. He opposed Pakistan's blasphemy laws as a stark betrayal of that vision, and he paid the ultimate price for his courage. Mr. Bhatti's death was not in vain, and his legacy will continue to inspire and encourage us to keep pressing on until his vision is realized. Thank you.
Shahbaz Bhatti was a man I knew and admired. I first met him at a conference in England. He told me then of his concern for Christians in Pakistan being persecuted and accused of blasphemy, and his concern for other religious minorities being persecuted, including the Ahmadi Muslims. At the end of our meeting, he told me that his life was in danger. I know Shahbaz Bhatti worked very hard to secure the release of Asia Bibi, a Christian woman who had been accused of blasphemy and who was in prison for many years. Bhatti and I kept in touch, and at a national prayer breakfast in Washington, he asked my wife and me to pray for him. He knew he was putting his life in danger by advocating for Christians and other minorities in Pakistan. I often look at the interview Bhatti gave shortly before his death, which is on YouTube. Everybody ought to look at it. In it, he said, "I want to share that I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of the cross." And he said, "I am following the cross. I am ready to die for a cause, living for my community and suffering people." And then he said, "And I will die to defend their rights." Shahbaz Bhatti was assassinated, leaving his mother's house in 2011. He was 42 years old. I vividly remember the phone call I received to this in the middle of the night in March of 2011. The operator said, "I have a call from the American ambassador in Pakistan." I knew even before I spoke to the ambassador that some harm had come to Shahbaz. Shahbaz Bhatti was a giant in the Christian faith. He was a martyr, and he was one of the most courageous and dedicated men I've ever known. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends." Shahbaz Bhatti did this.
Minister Bhatti, we forgot one question in the interview. Your life is threatened. By whom? And what sort of threats are you receiving?
The forces of violence, militant band organization, the Taliban and pro-Al-Qaeda, they want to impose their radical philosophy in Pakistan. And whoever stand against their radical philosophy, they threaten them. When I'm leading this campaign against the Sharia laws, for the abolishment of blasphemy law, and speaking for the oppressed and marginalized, persecuted Christian and other minority, these Taliban threaten me. But I want to share that I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of cross, and I'm following of the cross. And I'm ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community and suffering people, and I will die to defend their rights. So these threats and these warnings cannot change my opinion and principles. I will prefer to die for my principle and for the justice of my community, rather to compromise against on these threats.
Thank you.
As Shahbaz said in that interview, he was living and was ready to die for his principles, for his faith, and in pursuit of justice for the oppressed, for marginalized communities. And that effort goes on. The forces of oppression and injustice continue. Laws continue to be abused. Extrajudicial violence continues to threaten the vulnerable. The issues that Shahbaz was working on 10 years ago as a minorities minister still remain, and in some cases have even grown worse. There are reasons to take heart and to continue that effort. There's growing attention by governments and civil society to religious freedom in Pakistan and elsewhere around the world. And to discuss that, we are privileged to have a wonderful panel of speakers to join us today. And moderating that discussion, it's my privilege to introduce Mr. Raymond Chisti. Raymond's a member of the UK House of Commons. From 2019 to 2020, he was the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. He's also a Senior Fellow for International Religious Freedom Policy here with us at the Religious Freedom Institute. Raymond, thank you very much for chairing today's panel and joining us today.
Jeremy, thank you so very much. And it's a pleasure to join you and the brilliant esteemed guests on the panel today to look at the Shahbaz's vision, legacy, and pay tribute to a man who was head and shoulders above others around the world in regards to his courage, his bravery, and his commitment to freedom of religion or belief for all.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead and introduce our panelists and take it away. Thank you.
With that, Jeremy, if I may, at the very outset, introduce our panel for today. And the first person we have on the panel is Peter Bhatti, who is the founder and chair of the International Christian Voice and the brother of Shahbaz. Peter, very welcome to you today.
Thank you.
And the next person we have on the panel today is Fahnaz Isfahani, who is a former member of the National Assembly of Pakistan. She's a former press spokesman for President Zardari, and she's a senior fellow at RFI and a real champion for freedom of religion or belief for all around the world. We're also delighted to have today Jean Figel, who's a former EU Special Representative on freedom of religion or belief. He's a former EU Commissioner and a minister in Slovakia. Jean, real pleasure to have you with us today. We're also absolutely delighted to have today with us Knox Pence, who is a former United States of America Special Advisor on religious minorities at the State Department. And Knox had served in that role for over 20 years, during the term of 3 different presidents in the United States, and is currently a senior fellow at the Institute of Global Engagement and a visiting expert at the US Institute of Peace. So with that distinct panel, can I first of all go to Peter? And after Peter will come to you for 5 minutes, we'll then go to the other speakers for 5 minutes and then go through different questions after that. Peter, if I may first start with you, taking into account the last words of Shahbaz in that video, where he knew the very clear threat to his life, but he was absolutely determined to stand up for what he believed, that being freedom of religion or belief for all. So can I ask you to just clarify to us Shahbaz's vision, his legacy, and the issues that led him to campaign for the matters he passionately campaigned for, and those days and months prior to him losing his life, being assassinated, and as the Archbishop of Canterbury, His Grace Archbishop Wolsey, said, for all intents and purposes, he is a martyr for freedom of religion or belief for all.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. On August 11, 1947, the founding father of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in his foundational address to Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, clearly stated, "We are starting with the fundamental principle that we are all citizens and equal citizens of one state. And you are free to go to your temples, you are free to go to your mosque and any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of state." And it was the promise and hope that Christian and other religious groups cast their vote for the Jinnah's Pakistan. And until today, Christians and other religious minorities continue contributing to the prosperity and development of their motherland. Unfortunately, soon after the death of Mr. Jinnah, religious extremists and forces of violence moved in to control the narrative and led the country to being divided in religion, sects, and caste. The struggle of power between religious extremists and parties and democratic forces has led to many laws and executive order that has suppressed the voices of religious minorities, faith, and sidelined them from the mainstream politics, equal rights, and economic opportunities. Every succeeding government, despite their efforts, has been unable to effectively control the rising extremist intolerance and violence against the religious minorities of Pakistan. Shahbaz Bhatti's vision of Pakistan was the same as the founder of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He envisioned a Pakistan where everyone had equal rights, the rule of law, justice, and ability to live in peace and harmony. He arranged seminar conferences on interfaith dialogue to reduce intolerance, extremism, tolerance, and systematic racism. Shahbaz wanted to see Pakistan recognized and responsible member of international stage. He lived his entire life to build Pakistan on the vision of Mr. Jinnah and ultimately paid the price of life. The raised his voice continuously at every opportunity to review and make amendment to all discriminatory laws and sections in the Constitution of Pakistan. Protect non-Muslim women and girls from abduction and forceful conversion. Provide adequate representation of religious minorities in Provincial Assembly, National Assembly, and Senate. Implementation the rule of law to protect the marginalized and oppressed citizens of Pakistan. Empower the religious minorities who are subjected to social and economic deprivation. Remove hate material from schools, curriculums, include material that promote harmony, peace, and order. I am confident, Mr. Rahman, that today's panel discussion will lead to positive conclusion in identify the causes and recommended concrete steps to help fulfill the dream of Martyr Shahbaz Bhatti that his blood was not go in vain. Thank you.
And Peter, can I just ask you a specific question, if I may? With regards to the past 10 years, since the martyrdom of Shahbaz, has there been any real change with regards to the rights for religious minorities in Pakistan?
On his life, there was some changes taking place, like some seat in Senate and 5% quota in the government of Pakistan and all other places. But after his death, I did not see any physical change, which we can say that it lead to the religious minorities situation in Pakistan in improvement.
And Peter, can I just ask you this? I know we all know the answer to this, but it'd be good if you can clarify it. Nobody has been brought to account or held accountable for Shahbaz's murder. Is that right? In the past 10 years?
Yes.
And a further question, if I may, just ask you this, is from your perspective, as somebody who is the founder and chair of the International Christian Voice, what changes would you like to see in Pakistan for religious minorities in the short term, in the medium term, and the long term? And let me just clarify the point, not just for Christian, but for all minorities in Pakistan. What change would you like to see in the short term, medium term, and long term?
Okay. In short terms, I want to see that law must immediately act to protect falsely accused victims of blasphemy, and in some cases, the whole community need to be protected. Discriminatory law must be repealed. Forced marriage and forced religious conversion of minor girls and women must stop immediately, and court must not validate such illegal action. The perpetrator must be brought to justice without delay. The state should act and protect the most vulnerable citizen of Pakistan. These are the short terms, and few are in medium terms. The government of Pakistan in the consultation with the political parties and all other faith groups, need to review the discriminatory laws. Their recommendation should be forwarded to the Provincial and National Assembly for approval. Revise the education system to replace religious teaching with general education. Introduce programs that promote interfaith harmony on mainstream channels and through seminars and conferences at different levels. And long term, empower and enable the religious minorities to open more free education schools in low literacy area and provide them a respectable job. Abolish the bonded labor system that abuse the vulnerable sections of society and lead to the human trafficking, forced labor, and slavery. There should be only one fair judiciary system for all citizens of Pakistan. Allocate proportional seat of all levels of government to bring the religious minorities of Pakistan into the mainstream.
And Peter, can I just finish with one last point and a clarification, if I may? Shahbaz was at the forefront of the campaign which he led with regards to ending the separate electoral system, for religious minorities. He led that campaign. Since then, we've seen some changes. For example, I look at the RFI's report on Pakistan religious freedom landscape, and in that it says there's been some change. For example, in the Sindh province, you've seen the Hindu marriage bill, which recognizes Sikh and Hindu marriages. And with regards to child marriage, it's gone from 16 to 18. So there's been some legislative change, massive legislative change, which Shahbaz brought with regards to the separate electoral system. So those two initiatives, would you like to see similar laws in different provinces of Pakistan, in Punjab and also in the northwestern side of Pakistan and the Pakistani administrative Kashmir as well?
Yes, it is. I know that there is a legislation change in Sindh government for Marriage Act for forceful, but unfortunately, it's not taking in implementation. It is very important also in the whole Pakistan with all province that whatever is written in the constitution, it should at least to be implemented. Now, if no implementation is there, if you see Sindh and Punjab, the Arzu case, the court gave first that girl to the culprit. So where is a marriage act or that taking a place? When people start asking to the government, then they change their some idea. So this is also happened in different places. Same, when any blasphemy law victim take a place, people send the mobs and burn to the ashes. So it is very important. Whatever is there, government has take a control of law and order and set the punishment according to their rules.
And we're going to touch this topic a bit later on with other panelists with regards to being in statute and being implemented are two separate things. So we'll come to this very point a bit later on in our conversation. So may I just move on to Farnaz. Farnaz, can I just come to you and just look at a number of points in your presentation? You served with Shahbaz as a member of parliament, and you were in parliament at the time of his assassination, of his martyrdom. How would you describe Shahbaz and his commitment to religious freedom? And can I just take you back to the comments that you made at the time of his assassination to the media? You said this is a concerted campaign to slaughter every liberal, progressive, humanist voice in Pakistan. That was then. So what did you mean by that? And what do you make of the situation now in Pakistan?
Well, just to begin with, I was honored to be a member of the same party and to sit on the same benches in parliament with Shahbaz, and also with my role in the presidency. A lot of what we saw, starting with the Gojra massacre in 2009, where Christian village was burnt alive by extremists, and 8 Christians lost their lives. I mean, they were burnt alive. And that is the first time when you see Shahbaz Bhatti and Governor Salman Taseer being sent by the president to work on these issues on the ground. And following on this was the case with Bibi. I would say, Shahbaz was a lion of a man. He was not, he did not need to couch his words. Yes, he worked on interfaith activities, thought it was very important because of coming from a minority point of view. But he fought not just the blasphemy laws. Let's not forget, he also criticized the Sharia laws of Pakistan, because those laws basically made all non-Muslims, not just second, not just third, but barely citizens at all. So, he was a remarkable man, and I don't want to sound, I would like to celebrate his life, but what the assassination of Salman and Shahbaz did was, it silenced people. Those people who were good and brave and faithful within their own communities, be they Ahmadis or Shias or Sunni Muslims or Christians or Hindus or Parsis, or everyone got the message. If you are a Muslim like Salman Taseer, and if you are a Christian like Shahbaz Bhatti, this is what is going to happen to you. And they're too quick. I've had very restless nights before this panel today, because for me it is very personal on a different way to the family. I was one of the first people to go to the morgue when Governor Taseer's body was there. And I saw his body riddled with semi-automatic bullets throughout his body. So it wasn't just to kill him, to silence him. The pure hatred in the way that they assassinated him told you something. And I was also in Parliament the day when Shahbaz Bhatti died. And in Pakistan, the convention is that when a sitting member of the House dies, the session is cancelled. But on the day Shahbaz was assassinated and we heard the news in session, not only was the session not cancelled, but a Christian member of parliament asked to just say a blessing for Shahbaz. And that was also denied. With great difficulty, 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5 of us demanded a moment of silence and stood up, but the majority of parliament stayed in their seats. So, this is what you're looking at.
Farnaz, can I just ask you a question on that? If that is the reaction in Parliament with elected representatives, then the next question rightly comes is, what hope is there in the country to create a cohesive, tolerant, progressive Pakistan based on Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah's vision?
Well, the problem in Pakistan is now the politicians are too scared to talk about it, really. The extremist groups are not being defanged in the way that they were. They just keep changing their names and they still exist. And when they're not carrying out missions in Indian Kashmir and in other places, they come back and they burn Christian villages. They accusations of blasphemy, where you see people like Shagufta Kosar and her husband, who've been sitting there in prison all these years, you see Junaid Hafiz, a Muslim lawyer who stood up for a client who's considered a non-Muslim under the law. And you see, just in the last few days, a nurse called Tabitha from a hospital in Karachi. The problem with Pakistan's blasphemy law is this, and to tackle how to get rid of it, I think is a global effort. We cannot put more people at risk in Pakistan. Too many Christians and Ahmadis and Hindus and Shias have died at the altar of this law.
Can I just ask you a specific question on that with regards to the blasphemy laws and the reform of those laws? Because after the Godra incident, which saw 8 Christians being burned and over 100 properties being destroyed, one of the worst incidents of the terrorist attack, I would say, against Christian communities in Pakistan. Shahbaz Bhatti said this at the time to the Open magazine: the law is being misused. Many people are facing death threats and problems. They are being imprisoned and are being killed extrajudicially. So he said that at the time of the Godra incident, just before we saw his own martyrdom and that of Salman Taseer. The question I ask is, how do you see these laws being reformed, knowing the reaction that you saw in Parliament with regards to paying respects to Shahbaz? Knowing that and the issues with different political dynamics, how can these laws be amended, if not completely repealed, in the short to medium term?
I think this is a very long-term project, and I absolutely, the reason I have such huge respect for Mr. Figel is he utilizes mechanisms available within the EU to work on the release of Asia Bibi. In our government, we also got out a young Christian girl called Sharmati. But I do not look, I'd love to sit here and say to you, this is going to happen. Society in Pakistan in the last 10 years has become more and more and more extreme to a large, what we used to call soft Sunnis in Pakistan, the Barelvis, they are now joining up with the Deobandis and the Wahhabis on this insult of the Prophet, the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, which is written into the blasphemy law. So I have to say these things can happen, but it will need a concerted effort with both an interfaith effort plus a global effort.
Can I just ask, just before we finish on that point, so you would agree with the words at the time of Ali Dayan Hassan from the Human Rights Watch of Pakistan after Shahbaz's assassination, who said Bhatti's death represented a bitter fruit of appeasement of extremists and militant groups, both prior to and after the killing of Salman Taseer. So you would, from your assessment, would completely agree.
Absolutely. And I have just one last line. We talked about at some point offline about curriculum reform, schools and textbooks. Now, if you want societal change, you have to remove the hatred in these textbooks. And the problem is they'll remove an offending passage, right? But they'll put in a more offensive passage in, say, the Islamiyat, the religious textbooks. And do you know that all Pakistani children, no matter what their faith, have to study Islamiyat?
Yeah. And can I just say that you're absolutely right. And we're going to come to that in the wider discussion, after we've got through the other panelists. But one final point, would you agree with the view that was given to me when I was the British Envoy for religious freedom, to say you may not be able to repeal these laws just yet, but rather than having these laws which carry the death penalty being dealt with at the local level, where the FIR is cut, which is then open to, to thugs and other individuals bringing about political vendetta, is that have these laws, have these accusations being dealt with by the Ministry of Interior or at the higher court, rather than at the lower level, which allows abuse and then thugs and mobs to get together. Would you say that may be one step that can be looked at?
Well, I think police reform, teacher reform, because remember, there are books, but then there are also the biases that these teachers bring to these schools, right? So police reform, teacher training reform, and judicial reform are very important because, like in Salman Taseer's case, the judge who was willing to take the case, we had to get him on the next flight to leave the country with his family. So he couldn't stay on and keep addressing these issues. So thank you for your time. And
we're going to come back to this point. We're going to come back to this point with your expertise in Pakistan and the constitution and the schools. What can be done? We'll come back just after we've gone through Jean and Knox. Thank you so much with all that you've shared with us today. Jean, can I just come to you? During your time as the EU envoy for freedom of religion or belief, you made repeated visits to Pakistan, on the issue of Asha Bibi and securing her release. So if I can ask you this, what challenges did you encounter when you were visiting Pakistan, having those discussions with regards to the release of Asha Bibi? And linked to that, I ask you this question. Asha Bibi was one case, but there are many, many people in Pakistan, as we heard from His Grace, the former Archbishop Coots, now Cardinal Coots. These laws are used to discriminate against Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So from your interaction and engagement, what were the challenges with regards to the release of Asha Bibi, which touches on the whole issue about the blasphemy laws? And linked to that, what levers does the EU have to work with Pakistan to address these challenges? And also, I know from the previous statements you made at the time, the EU does also have a GSP plus trade status with Pakistan, which says one has to respect human rights. How much of a lever was that? What can the EU do to work with Pakistan to bring about that change?
Thank you, Rehman, not only for this introduction, but for your work. And thanks all for not only this interesting panel, but especially for the whole commemoration or tribute we pay today to Shahbaz Bhatti. I would like also to mention again Salman Taseer and many unnamed victims of social hostilities or religious persecution in Pakistan today. I also want to bring here greetings from Paul Bhatti, another brother of Shahbaz. I'm quite frequently in contact with him. As Peter Bhatti mentioned, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his dream about pluralist, democratic Pakistan and a good homeland or civil state for all. This dream was very roughly changed, especially by military regime of Zia-ul Haq, and he changed not only name but also constitution of the state, and now we see the consequences. I think that it was very detrimental change for future of Pakistan. This white strip for minorities on the green flag of Pakistan is frequently seen as white strip with bloody stains, blood of Christians, Ahmadis, Hindus, and other minorities is a price for this persecution. So I must say, from my experience, that really Pakistan, regrettably, is ranking very high among intolerant societies, despite improvements since 2018, the last or the current government. Yeah, your point was it is possible to achieve a better future for minorities. I must say very clearly, unequivocally yes. And example of European-Pakistani relations is kind of proof. We have quite long relations, but especially in last years, since 2014, when this instrument was mentioned and adopted, GSP+, which means preferential trade agreement, which brings billions of euros in profit or benefits to Pakistan, to Pakistani companies and budget. It is valid for current 10 years until 2023, and it's regularly assessed. And there is very logical, normal pressure on the commitments which are a part of the GSP+, because it's not only trade, but also commitment to democratic principles, rule of law, political stability, human rights. It had positive impact, I am sure, on democratic developments, on stability proven by the third civilian government instead of previous regime, which I mentioned already. In 2019, European Union signed so-called strategic engagement plan. So it increased the level of relations with Pakistan. When I started my mission as a special envoy, I was repeatedly refused by polite diplomatic language in 2016. But then 2017, it has very quickly or visibly changed when Minister of Trade and Attorney General came to Brussels, and they came to see me and to invite me directly to come to Pakistan. So I went almost immediately in December then, 2017, to Islamabad, Lahore, Rawalpindi, Karachi. And my messages were of the two, I would say, lines. One line was that status quo in human rights and justice is not enough, because if the Pakistanis want GSP Plus to continue for additional couple of years and to get profit of billions of euros, they must do more. Status quo is not enough. So it was not intervention, it was not interference, but very clear message. Because GSP Plus counts also on 27 international conventions on human rights, labor law, fight against corruption, environmental protection, which is very good for people living there. It's not for Brussels or for anybody else. It's especially for people living in Pakistan. And my second message, due to the famous worldwide known case of Asia Bibi, was that justice delayed is justice denied. And again, it was not interference into the system, but very clear principle for justice for all. And then I went there again in 2018, and then there was elections, and now we have this new government led by Imran Khan, where the main party is called Movement for Justice. Movement for Justice. So they should deliver what they promise or they have in the name of the party. And somehow it really moved. I don't want to speak in details, but in October 2018, Supreme Court in the first decision, and then in January review, liberated Asia Bibi. And that was a real great signal and victory for all defenders of human rights. And I want to thank here at this moment to Canadians, to Prime Minister and the whole society for their courage and safety and hospitality offered to Asia Bibi's family and also to many other refugees. We need such countries. And
Jean,
to conclude,
can I just ask a specific point on that before you conclude? You looked at the leverage that was applied that you put with the GSP Plus and the human rights aspect when you had discussions with the Pakistan authorities. You've also just heard Ahmed Shahid just say Pakistan's got some of the harshest blasphemy laws, which have the death penalty linked to them. Pakistan used to have a moratorium on the death penalty. That is not the case now. So do you think the same leverage can be applied as we move forward in Pakistan to scrap the death penalty for these offences?
Yeah, I spoke on this many times, and evidently to totally ban this legislation is premature, let's say, in political sense, but to push for more responsible applications, which means to fight on the state level against abuse of blasphemy, make it really less evident in the society. I think it is already in place. We can see more professionality in the police or those who deal with blasphemy accusations. We see less cases. Of course, there are still very bloody issues, including question on death penalty. I see it as a process, and we need to continue. When I say we, I mean friends of Pakistan in terms of countries, but also NGOs and people.
And John, can I just come back to you on that? I'm just coming up to the time limit. Can I come back to a similar point to you in the group discussion on this with regards to future reforms? If I can just take in Knox Thames and come back to you specifically on how we bring about some of these changes. So can I just move to Knox Thames, who has spent 20 years at the State Department covering religious minorities with across the globe. Knox, with regards to Shahbaz Bhatti, you knew him, you regarded him as a hero. I read your statement, your article today. With that in the background, your visit to Pakistan, all the other countries that you've covered across the globe on freedom of religion or belief. Can I draw your attention to what you said in your article on the 20th of October 2020, as you were transitioning the State Department? You said in Pakistan, an environment where you have individual is free to speak truth as his or her conscience leads is one which every community can thrive. You said that in your statement, and your idea is to have an environment where every individual is free to speak truth as his or her conscience leads is one in which every community can thrive. You then went on to say, with regards to Pakistan, Pakistan is incredibly complicated, massive in size, and is a poster child for religious persecution. What did you mean by that? And with your experience, how can you bring about change on religious freedom within Pakistan and other countries like that around the world?
Pakistan is one of the most difficult places in the world for religious freedom, both for the Muslim majority and Muslim minorities. We know that the blasphemy law impacts everybody. My concern is the way that it's so vicious and vengefully applied, it's going to consume the country. There was a report that came out recently that tracked the use of the blasphemy law in the Punjab province. Over 200 cases last year alone, 75% of them were Muslims brought against other Muslims. Now, it has a disproportionate impact on minorities because they're such a small percentage of the country, but this shows the danger of the blasphemy law for everybody in Pakistan. It empowers the most extreme and violent voices while it continues to pressure and shrink the moderate middle. In addition to that, we've seen the forced conversion and marriage of Hindu and Christian girls continue with really no recourse. And calling it forced conversion and forced marriage, I think, is a euphemism for spiritual and physical rape. And yet the state can't seem to find a way to intervene and to stop it. The Shia Muslim community in Baluchistan is regularly targeted for violence. And Pakistan has a horribly unique system of discrimination against the Ahmadi Muslim community. We've seen their leadership charged with the crime of just calling themselves a Muslim. We've seen the blasphemy law used against them. And now we know that American Ahmadis here have been charged by Pakistani officials back home for things they put on the internet. So this is really getting out of hand. And we've got to find new ways to encourage Pakistan to rediscover, to go back to its roots of a country founded on protecting minority rights, creating a haven on the subcontinent for all religious communities. That's going to mean strengthening Pakistanis, people like Shahbaz and Salman Taseer and those who remain. It's going to mean also external pressure because the military is so strong and pervasive in the games it plays with the quote unquote good terrorists. It's going to take the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, European Union countries insisting on reforms. And if reforms don't come, then using sanctions. When I was in the administration in that special envoy role, we were able to have Pakistan designated as a country of particular concern. The first time it had ever happened, to send a signal that Pakistan is one of the 10 worst countries in the world for religious freedom. I was tapped to lead the negotiations with the Pakistanis and say, you've got to start taking on these hard reforms or sanctions could follow. And it's going to be that kind of incentive to push the powers that be in Pakistan to engage these forces of intolerance. Now, they'll say they can't do it. It's societal. It's too deep. But we know that when the military, the judiciary, and the politicians, when their interests align, we saw how they rolled up the extremists who were threatening violence against Asia Bibi once she was acquitted. So they can do it when they want to. And so we've got to find ways to encourage it or cajole it. And then
just on that point, sorry, go on, Max, carry on your last point.
Just education. How do we engage the future of Pakistan to have them appreciate diversity, the benefits of pluralism, and individual human rights? Pakistan is incredibly diverse. This has got to be instilled in the young people of Pakistan, or we're just going to be dealing with this problem for generations to come.
Not just as on that, and we'll come back to education just in a minute, but from your experience, and I pay tribute to the work you did along with Ambassador Sam Brownback to set up the International Alliance of 32 like-minded countries coming together to stand up for freedom of religion or belief. So in terms of working in the multilateral forum, the UN, the OSCE, the Human Rights Council, working through the alliance, what can you do to address the situation in democratic societies? You've got challenges in authoritarian countries, but you've got challenges on form in democracies. And with that, I just want to take you to a section in that same article where you said, in a democratic environment like South Asia, when leaders are elected on a platform of division or are beholden to a core constituency with nationalistic or religiously rancid views, it's much more difficult to convince leaders to change. Their bad policies are fulfilling their campaign promises. In the same article, you cover the situation in India with regards to the disinformation with regards to the Muslims on COVID-19. So when you've got that same issue in Pakistan and the same issue in India and others around the world that we've seen during COVID-19, how do you bring about that change when that language has been used to tie the political establishment in to the election promises they've made to appeal to a certain audience?
That is the question. That is going to be the challenge of promoting religious freedom in South Asia and other democratic spaces with severe human rights abuses. To Farnaz's point, we're going to have to play a long game. This goes back to education, engaging the mindset that leads people to perpetrate horrible human rights abuses. How do we teach children to appreciate diversity, to respect the other, that they understand if someone thinks, believes, or looks different than themselves, that's okay. That actually is a positive because Pakistan is such a diverse and ancient society. But in the short game, it's also going to mean countries, the friends of Pakistan, saying you can be better. And we want to urge you to be better as a reflection, as an American, of American values, respect for diversity and human rights and religious freedom. But it's also in our interests. If a nuclear-armed Pakistan continues its slide towards extremism, if it continues to fund terrorist activity in India and plays games in Afghanistan, this is a disease that will spread and impact other countries in violent ways. So
just on that, Mox, and I'm just looking at the time, but I'll come back to you. But your point is, look, the issue, if you don't create a cohesive society, it'll come back to hit every fabric and institution in Pakistan, as we saw over the years with the loss of 40,000 civilians to the fight against terrorism with the Taliban, and then losing 5,000 military personnel in that same fight. And I think the Farnaz was in government with President Zardari when they had to fight the Taliban, in parts of Pakistan, that element of extremism. So the country itself has had that challenge and had to fight at every level the extremist element. So your point is, unless you address this now, the issue of a cohesive society, it will come back to hit every element of society and the fabrics of the Jinnah's vision for Pakistan. Would you be right in that?
Absolutely, and that's happening now. I mean, this is not a future concern. This is a concern up to date.
And then can I just now move on, if I may, into the question I have for all the panelists with regards to moving forward in Pakistan. I know, Farnaz, you touched on it, and not you touched on it. If I may just refer to the all-party parliamentary group on minorities in Pakistan, led by Lord Alton and Jim Shannon. They visited Pakistan in 2018, and then they did a report in 2019, a number of different recommendations. And one of them was to say there should be compulsory training for teachers, primary and secondary schools, with regards to cohesion and interfaith, and there should be a toolkit available for teachers and schools across Pakistan. That was one element linked to the second element, and I think, Farnaz, you talked about it. It's about interfaith and cohesion in schools, because in the same report it says under the 1973 Constitution, Section 22(1), religious minorities have a choice if they want their children to take part in a Islamic prayer, or they can have their children not take part in a prayer. They have a choice. So with regards to cohesive Pakistan and with regards to education reforms, along with those reforms, any specifics to go with what was said by the all-party group on what needs to be done on an education perspective? Farnaz, if I come to you first, and then Peter and Jean, if I can come to you on that same question, if you that or any other specific points you want to raise. Farnaz, over to you. You're on mute. You're on mute.
When we come to, we talked about the teacher training and the toolkit idea. Lord Alton is just such an inspiring person. But, because the blasphemy law went back to British law, the wording of the British law and what it did is something we should look at very closely. It shouldn't be sold as being the British law, but in the original British penal code dealing with blasphemy, it held accountable clerics, authors, and people in positions of power who were, by the action, leading to communal violence. So it's the opposite of what has happened to the law in Pakistan. Because I think saying that you're going to do away with the law is going to be, people die for that every day. But I think if you don't you talk about amending, but with the military on board, as not said very clearly, political parties and clerics, you could possibly bring in that whole, some of what was enshrined in the British penal code on blasphemy, which Ziaul Haq then Islamized.
And just, if I just may go to you, Peter, from your experience, you've touched on it before. Any other specific education reforms that you think can be done in Pakistan to support younger generation growing up with cohesion and tolerance? I'll give you an example. When we saw the funeral of the convicted murderer, Qadri, who killed Salman Taseer, we saw tens of thousands of individuals come to his funeral, and he was a convicted murderer by the court of the land. So how do you address that mindset through education in younger generation, bringing about a cohesive, tolerant, progressive Pakistan?
Yes, Mr. Rahman, I personally believe that it need to be more discussion with the government of Pakistan regarding the education and syllabus. And we should get involved with them. And there is a problem, and solution is also there. I urge to the international community that discuss all this issue, sit with Pakistan, not we can finish today and forget, continue, sit with Pakistan government and other related people, those share their views and ask them how they get the idea from, like education and other discriminatory law. what can be done, and they will. I am confident that they will provide you the all the solution as well. So in that way, especially in education, is the most important. I also raised this issue in my uh, question answer, and because education is the most thing. If education gets stated, hate material will get out from there, and proper education will be every citizen of Pakistan, despite of religion. I think Pakistan will go to the better direction.
And just linked to the better direction and education, Jan, if I can just come back to you, and you talked about it before, and it's in the all-party report and other reports, and you briefly touched on it about the police and making sure the institutions are trained to address the issue of religious minorities so they can get the correct reports filed in the first place. So is there support available from the EU, or is there current support or future support on the training of the different establishments in Pakistan to better address these challenges on the ground?
Yes, Raymond, definitely. This is part of our program to promote rule of law, justice for all, which means also to train police corps and judiciary. I think we need better laws, but also better professionals responding and implementing these rules. To the education, which is also part of the story here, I want to make a final point. I think it was Nelson Mandela who said that education is the most influential tool to change human society and person. And I think that double objective should be pursued in Pakistan. Access to education for all, not only for some, for elites or the urban population, but for all. And secondly, relevant education, which means, especially in this situation, reform of madrasas, detoxification of textbooks, and of course, also learning about the others, or religious literacy.
And just on that, if I may just come to you, Knox, we're running out of time. Just linking into what Jean has said, you've read the report of the all-party parliamentary group. You've been at the State Department. You've worked with multilateral partners on addressing religious intolerance around the world. So on the short term, medium term, and long term, both in addressing the blasphemy laws and reforms, what would you say can be done with Pakistan, short term, medium term, long term, to address the concerns and real issues on freedom of religion or belief?
It's going to take a collective effort. I like to say that the most durable gains for religious freedom are part of a four-legged stool, with diplomats, parliamentarians, civil society, and religious actors all working together. So on the diplomatic side, our countries have to make it a priority. We have to create consequences. The Pakistanis will push back, but we've got to, if we really believe these are universal values that are part of our culture, then we need to export that into our diplomacy as well. Parliamentarians, they're very pleased by the many MPs that have spoken out. They have a unique voice that they can leverage to speak into issues and also motivate their own governments to do more. And then civil society in Pakistan, how do we protect that moderate middle that is under pressure, that is oftentimes being hunted down? There are ways we can give international support through our programs. We can give them encouragement. And then lastly, religious leaders. In a place like Pakistan where faith permeates everything, we've got to find those brave and courageous Muslim leaders and other leaders from minority communities to speak up and say that the blasphemy law actually is a perversion of what's intended, that this is an unjust system, that this is not reflecting the values that God has bestowed upon us, but actually is twisting them and being used in a harmful way. If we can get all four of these working together, I'm hopeful that we can see a Pakistan that's better, so that when David Bhatti is picking up the charge that his uncle left, that he will be able to encounter a Pakistan that's better than the one that Shahbaz left behind.
Knox, can I just say a big thank you? We're just wrapping up now for today's the panel discussion. So can I say a big thank you to Peter, to Fanaz, to Jean and Knox, for your contributions today on this, a momentous occasion when we look at the life of Shahbaz. And as Ashia Bibi says, the Shahbaz may not be with us in person today, but his values live on in each and every one of us. and the personal cost that these massacres and these murders have around the world. If we break it down to the personal loss for the individuals concerned, their families, we heard from Peter today, a brother who lost his brother. You had with Shahbaz, 4 brothers, a sister, and a mother, lose their very loved one. Each and every one of us around the world, cherishes that time with our loved ones. And one imagines losing one's loved one in those such horrendous circumstances, and then filled for the human side. We saw from David Bhatti, losing his uncle. The scenes that we saw going to Islamabad, looking forward to meeting his uncle, but then saying his uncle is no longer with him. Why? Why is uncle not with him? His uncle is not with him because his uncle believed in the basic fundamental right, which each and everyone around the world has a right to enjoy, and that is being able to practice religion openly and freely. And for me, if I may make this point and say to everyone around the world, Archbishop, former His Grace Archbishop Coutts and Cardinal Coutts made the point, the blasphemy laws are used to target Muslims, non-Muslims alike, to settle vendetta and personal scores. I come from a Muslim background. My father, grandfather were all imams. I could be elected as a member of parliament in the United Kingdom and then go on to be a United Kingdom special envoy for freedom of religion or belief. I think every citizen around the world, and for me, covering Pakistan, if you are a British citizen, in my case, of Pakistani origin, and there's 1.1 million of us here in the UK, we have a moral obligation, because in the United Kingdom, we can enjoy our faith openly and freely. You can have a mosque, you can practice your faith in every way, shape, and form. And then when you then see minorities not being able to have those rights, then on that basis, we around the world, British diaspora, Muslim community, Pakistani communities, have a moral obligation to stand up and to say we want to see minorities in Pakistan or anywhere else where you are a diaspora community stand up to say they have a moral obligation to be able to practice their religion openly and freely. And as we move forward...
Rahman, I'm so sorry to cut you, but I think this is important. We have not discussed the apostasy laws at all. So I just want to leave that with you, because the so-called these forced marriages or forced whatever they are of these young Christian and Hindu girls, they then cannot convert back to Christianity or Hinduism, because that's apostasy. So for the rest of their lives, I think we have to, with blasphemy, also talk about apostasy. So
I think you're right. Peter touched on the issue about forced conversion. On the issue of young either Christian or Hindu girls, and we touched on some of the reforms that have been put forward. But you're absolutely right. I think you look at across the board, you look at blasphemy laws and you look at conversion laws. Everyone should be able to practice their faith or belief, or convert from one to the other, or have no faith at all. That is their basic fundamental right. And most of the countries around the world, they sign up to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's Peter's point. You can have laws, you can sign up to laws, but you have to be able to ensure that they are put into practice. The other point that comes through today is, I think you said it, it's with regards to bring about change. We're not going to be able to bring about change overnight in Pakistan or any other country when it comes to some of these issues, when you've got polarized societies. And it brings me to the point where the great British saint, John Henry Newman, lead kindly light. I cannot see the distant sea, but a step at a time is enough for me. And that comes to the reform of the blasphemy laws. You may not be able to repeal them, but you can bring about administrative changes. And as Jean, you covered the point on the death penalty. You've had a moratorium on that. You could look to ensure that the death penalty is no longer applied, and use the GSP plus the trade status leverage to bring about more change, as you previously did with Pakistan. And I end with this. For every individual and in Pakistan, what is absolutely crucial is the words of the founding father of Pakistan. And this is what he said: you are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosque or any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may believe any religion or caste or creed. The state has nothing to do with it. And that is what successive governments, whichever political flavor they are, and we from the outside cannot say which governments come in or go in Pakistan. That's a matter for the people of Pakistan. But that is what Pakistan needs to adhere to, the vision of the founder of its country, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And the last word, people like Shahbaz Bhatti are very far and few. They put their lives on the risk for the values they stand for. And for him, he didn't just do it for the minorities in Pakistan. He did it for people around the world to be able to practice their faith freely and openly. So to you, Shahbaz, you may not be with us, but your memory, your vision, your legacy will always inspire us to stand up and to do the right thing. So thank you so very much. And I now pass over to Jeremy to give the concluding remarks. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Raymond, and for chairing a really fantastic panel discussion that had so many kernels of wisdom. So thank you very much. As we conclude, I do want to extend a final word of thanks to our co-hosts for today's event, the Institute for Global Engagement, particularly Mr. Knox Thames, who you just heard on the panel, for their work in helping to bring this event together, and to International Christian Voice, particularly Mr. Peter Bhatti, and others from their team. You can learn more about ICV and their vision of a world in which people of all faiths can live in freedom and equality, and also support their humanitarian efforts at icvcanada.org. And then finally, to my colleagues at the Religious Freedom Institute, who've gone above and beyond in challenging circumstances to put this program together, thank you. You can find this whole program, as well as dozens of tribute statements, available at rfi.org. We all do hope from today's event that you've been inspired and encouraged to continue forward in speaking and acting in the pursuit of justice and religious freedom. Thank you.